On December 14, 2012, a Maricopa County jury found Larry Lloyd Carver guilty of multiple counts in connection with the murder of Heather Quan in 2006 and the attempted murder of Ryan Waller in the residence. But there are permutations that Larry would initially get off because most of the evidence used against him was obtained from his wife. However, according to the law in Arizona, if the wife invoked her right of marital privilege and refused to testify, Larry would remain free. Larry's son, Richie Carver, an accomplice, was convicted of felony murder, burglary, aggravated assault, and misconduct involving weapons and sentenced in 2008 to natural life in prison. Does this mean Larry Lloyd Carver would go scot-free despite the proximity of his crime? Would Heather Quan's family appeal the case to get desired justice? What was the motive behind the attack? You'll find out in this video. But before we continue, please kindly subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more spine-chilling videos. On December 23, 2006, Ryan Waller and his girlfriend, Heather Quan, were having a quiet night at their apartment when Larry Carver and his son Richie went to Ryan's house for revenge. An unusual bang on the door forced Ryan Waller to check out who it could be. Waller cracked the door open, and the Carvers drew a gun to his face. Carver and his son Richie tried to gain access into the house, and Ryan tried to stop them by pushing against the door and was shot in the face, leaving him unconscious. Next, the Carvers walked into the apartment and shot Heather Quan in the head, apparently because she was a witness. Larry Carver and his son ransacked the apartment and left with weapons and a computer from the scene, thinking they had killed both occupants, but Waller was still miraculously alive. After 2 days without seeing their son, Ryan Waller's parents became anxious. How can Ryan not be here for Christmas dinner, they questioned. The father called the police, and the investigation started. The Phoenix Police Department arrived at the scene and found Ryan Waller lying on the floor, but still conscious. He had a severe black eye that was swollen shut that seemed like he had received a heavy blow to the area. Police raised Ryan and placed him in the back of a squad car while they went around the apartment for proof. The investigators called the medical department to figure out what happened to Heather Quan and left Ryan Waller in the back of their car. After surveying the crime scene, the police drove Ryan to the station for interrogation. They reportedly took 43 pictures of his injuries before they started questioning him. Unfortunately, from the start of the interrogation process, the police never believed any of Ryan's words. His answers to the questions thrown at him didn't make any sense due to his head injury, and the police couldn't send him to the hospital to be medically cleared. It was an eyesore, and many people were dismayed by the incompetence of the police involved in the case. The way he says, "My head hurts," really breaks my heart. He deserves so much better. I'm so sorry for him, said a member of the public. During the interrogation, the investigators looked for contradictions and asked Ryan about what had happened that night. Ryan named 2 different women on the couch. The officer asked again, "Do you know what happened in your house last night? Do you know what happened to your nose? There's a big chunk out of your nose. Were you fighting someone?" Ryan, who started off sounding off point, was becoming conscious and giving right and clear answers to questions thrown at him by the investigators. Ryan then revealed, "There is a dead girl in the living room." He then talked about the murderers, Lloyd Carver and his son Richie, holding revolvers and punching him in the face, and how he was shot in the eye. The officer scoffed at his declaration and told Ryan that if he had been shot in the eye, he wouldn't be sitting here. He would be dead. The detective continued, "Did you shoot Heather?" and begged Ryan Waller to give more clarification about the gun incident in the house. Ryan replied by saying that Richie Carver and Lloyd Carver put him in a sleeping hold, but could not explain what he meant. The officer, who was becoming quite angry, said, "You're all over the board." The more the detectives asked Ryan to give a detailed explanation about what happened to Heather, the more he talked about Richie and Lloyd Carver, and the more his story changed in little ways. At one point, Ryan said Heather's dad did the shooting. At another, he said Richie was Heather's brother. That makes no sense. You need to start telling me the truth. Your story doesn't make sense. Your story doesn't even come close to the truth, the detective said furiously. The detective, who was not impressed with Ryan's answers, looked him in the eyes and walked off the interrogation room. Although, when he came back, he grabbed Ryan's head and Ryan whimpered that his head hurt. The tough-talking detective immediately became soft and caring. He uncuffed Ryan and informed the fire department to come pick him up for treatment immediately. The interview took a long time, and what might seem like nonsensical responses from Ryan really were not. Ryan had already dropped some truths about the actual perpetrators, Richie Carver and Lloyd Carver. He mentioned the name of Richie Carver, who was an old roommate of his, and that was enough to pin the Carvers. After being transported to the hospital, Ryan was rushed into the surgery room. Why had it taken the police so long to recognize the dire situation he was in? Even if they thought he was responsible for the killing of Heather, he still should have been given medical attention. There are reports that Ryan Waller lost his left eye and a large portion of his brain. Who do we blame? After medical checks, the staff confirmed that he was shot twice in the head. Now the detectives already had someone on their radar. The strength that Ryan Waller mustered to speak with the investigators ended up helping the police go after Richie and Lloyd. The Carvers were apprehended, but the motive behind the shooting varied. One camp said Richie Carver and Ryan Waller were friends and roommates and had a misunderstanding on something that ended with both men pointing guns at each other. The other camp said that Richie had hit on Heather Quan, causing Ryan to kick him out of the residence. There's not much information available on what transpired, but there's clear evidence of who pulled the trigger. In 2008, Richie was convicted and sentenced to a term of natural life in prison. In addition, Larry Lloyd Carver was found guilty of multiple counts in connection with the murder of Heather Quan. Still, there were permutations that he would initially get off because most of the evidence used against him was based on a confession obtained from his wife. So all that Mrs. Carver needed to do to free her husband from captivity was to invoke her right of marital privilege and refuse to testify. Heather Quan's family was not impressed with this law. They appealed to Arizona legislators to use what would become known as Heather's Law to revoke the marital privilege law. After a legal battle, the court ruled in favor of the state in November 2011. Today's verdict is a long-awaited milestone on what has been a torturous and difficult road to justice for the victims of this terrible crime. Requiring an extraordinary detour through our state legislature, we now await the imposition of a sentence that will appropriately hold this defendant accountable for his criminal actions, said Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery. On January 25, 2013, Larry Carver was re-indicted and convicted by Judge Susana Pineda of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, burglary, and aggravated assault. Sadly, Ryan Waller would pass away at age 28 after suffering seizures due to the injuries from the heavy shots. But he was a hero who helped to solve his girlfriend's murder and what would eventually become his own murder, despite suffering for days in his apartment, then pushing through an unnecessary and gruesome investigation where he didn't even know why he was there to begin with. His brain was powerful and resilient. It's just awful that something wasn't done sooner. What do you think about the family of Heather Quan appealing to the legislature to enact what would become known as Heather's Law, which amended the marital privilege statute to compel a defendant's spouse to testify? Tell us in the comments below. Thank you for watching.